I fly and I alight as an hawk. Of Mother of Emerald are my mighty sweeping wings. I swoop down unto the black earth, and it gladdens into green at my coming. Rejoice. Hello and welcome, wherever you may be. There's a lot of material this week. 2 passages from Mr. Gurdjieff, one about Egolionopties, something from Nyland, and many other things besides. Last week I was doing a lot of powerful energy work purification. And I walked out of the house one day and I hadn't gone even 2 blocks when an exuberant group of ladies asked me to take some photos of them with their camera. And there was a really good shared feeling there, and I recognised it as the result of the work I had done, because life really is an energetic thing, which is a relief because it means there are many possibilities. Returning to the trans-space ship Karnak, Beelzebub would have said more, but just then everything was suddenly lit up and permeated by a pale blue something. From that moment the speed of falling of the ship Karnak began to decrease perceptibly. This meant that in this sphere of the universe one of the great cosmic Egolionopties had appeared, and was about to come alongside the spaceship Karnak. And indeed, through the transparent outer walls of the Karnak, the source of that pale blue something soon became visible, lighting up not only the whole interior of the ship, but also the space of the universe around this great cosmic Egolionopty, as far as the ordinary vision of beings could reach. In the whole universe, there are only 4 of these great Egolionopties, and each of them is under the direction of one of the 4 all-quarters maintainers of the universe. A hurried and somewhat anxious commotion spread among the beings aboard the Karnak, and in a short time all the passengers and crews assembled in the main hall at the centre of the ship. When the great cosmic Egolionopty had come alongside, certain partitions of the ship Karnak were moved apart in a special way. In their path from the Egolionopty into the main hall of the ship, a procession composed of several archangels, with a multitude of angels, cherubim and seraphim, and they too carried branches in their hands, but theirs were of palm. At the head of this procession walked a venerable archangel, immediately followed by 2 cherubim solemnly bearing a casket from which radiated something orange. In front of everyone, in the main hall of the ship Karnak, stood Beelzebub, and behind him were ranged his kinsmen and the captain of the ship, and behind them stood all the others at a respectful distance. When the procession drew near, it halted, and the 2 groups of 3-brained beings of different natures joined in singing the hymn to our endlessness that is always sung on such occasions everywhere in the universe by beings of all natures and all forms of exterior coating. Thou long patient creator of all that breathes, thou abundantly loving cause of all that exists, thou unique vanquisher of the merciless hero pass, now to the sound of our exaltation rejoice and abide in beatitude. By thy unprecedented labours thou hast given us the source of our arising. By thy vanquishing of the hero pass thou hast opened to us the possibility of perfecting ourselves to the sacred unclad, and now only rest as thou hast merited. We in gratitude will maintain all thou hast created, and always and in everything will extol thee forever. After this exhortation, all the beings present in the space ship Karnak began to sing the prescribed sacred canticle entitled I Rejoice. And when this sacred canticle had been sung, all the angels and cherubim with the venerable archangel at their head returned to the cosmic Egolionopty, which then drew away from the ship Karnak and gradually disappeared into space, whereupon the passengers and crew dispersed to their various places and the Karnak resumed its falling towards its destination. Now, I was comparing this week the layout of the Muslim shrine, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, with the cruciform layout that is always used for Christian churches. The Muslim is very much like Mecca, like a inner cave and a circle on a plain, 4 or 5 maybe. And remember, the Star of David is 6 and has also that bounded nature whereby it protects itself. But not the cross. The cross extends outwards because it is 7, because it is whole. And there is enough stability inside to allow one to reach outwards without fear. There was a teacher called William Nyland in New York, and he ran thousands of Gurdjieff groups over there. I'll read out a short passage from him. You can think about what's not right about it. He says, "An aim requires at certain times a tremendous amount of sacrifice. It does require in the end the sacrifice of yourself. And don't make any mistake about that it is necessary in order to understand what is the proper attitude towards an aim and building your soul, that everything of you, what you are now on earth, is going to be sacrificed for that purpose. And you may as well learn it now, because that is what God will require of you. He requires you, when you are a member of a group, to understand what is the meaning of solidarity, the meaning of feeling, the meaning of living together, the meaning of sharing, the meaning of giving something without any thought whatsoever of having any return." My God, is that a communist doctrine or what? Actually, the idea of having an aim was quite important to Mr. Gurdjieff. Why? Because he recognized that the development of the real person, of what you really are, of the flowering of that feeling in your guts about who you really are, is the whole point of the path, because God doesn't want slaves. He wants you to be who you were meant to be, and what's in the way is all that stuff upstairs. And because people are not very acquainted with who they are, one tries to make an effort coming from the guts or coming from the body rather than in a normal way from the head. What do I really feel? What do I like? Do I like the brunette or the blonde? Do I like cherry cake or do I like cheesecake? Let's try. Let me try a little bit and see what happens, and I'll try a little bit more. I'll contemplate, I'll make some effort, I'll try to take some direction, and slowly, I work my way into what I really am. And that becomes the aim of what I do. So Nyland here is talking about sacrificing yourself for God or for a group. He's like a bad priest or something. A lot of these groups simulate something religious, and they add a bit of jazz to it. But the real Christian priesthoods are teaching lines that are thousands of years old, and that have real methods that are also thousands of years old. But in that period after World War II, there was jazz, there was yoga, it was all mixed together, etc. And along with that, modern people seem to have completely lost the sense that a superior person actually knows something of a higher value, of people of great technical ability. I noticed that Madame de Salzman died in 1990, Maybe she was the last anchor. Only 2 years later, after she died in 1992, the American foundation that Nyland was a part of rewrote Gurdjieff's book, which is quite shocking because it's well known that Gurdjieff had used all his genius, all his knowledge. He had trialed each chapter in front of many students watching for very slight reactions in them, and had already written it 2 or 3 times before he came to his final version in 1950. How anybody could think that you would rewrite such a book is quite incomprehensible. Looking at a picture of Mr. Nyland, he looks like he might be a warm kind of man. Yes, maybe he does. But he's also got an unintelligent face. A face that reminds me a lot of Tibetan lamas today. They want to be your patriarch, your Father Christmas, and be really helpful. But how helpful can you be if you don't understand the basic ideas of the tradition? A second double red flag here is when he says, building your soul. This is a kind of fortification that is typical in religious simulation, because they have no real methods. Gurdjieff says these people have never been to a traditional school and have never met anybody that has been to a traditional school. As I said, there are 8 million science graduates every year on this planet, and look at the state of it. A large number of ideas have recently fused into one for me. We're the little birds in our world. The ladies walk around the rim of the nest, tucking it in, straightening it up, tidying it up, and keep walking around that circle, making sure everything is in the right place. And then the husband flies down from above, carrying a small twig in his beak, and he passes it to her. They feel the current inside themselves of what they are, and they manifest it in the world. Just like the priests make their buildings according to the current that is inside of them. What is really living is the current, which is a certain unity of the holy forces that has been woven inside. That is what is really alive, and it is reflected outwardly in what we call the physical world, which is a world made from a different gravity center. We are 3-brained beings, so according to the culture that we know, we can manifest quite differently. If our regulation and rhythm is lost, we fall to a lower level and manifest differently, according to whether the knowledge is present or lost. If we descend further, there is no sense of knowledge at all, and there is only what is seen outside, and trying to understand things in terms of our prodding of that material world. Everything is externalized. In church, the building is stone and wood, the physical materials from the earth. The clouds and fragrance that lift through the chamber are an attempt to make visible things that are real, but that are not yet visible. Just like poetry, you're trying to materialize things that are there but cannot be seen yet, because we live between worlds. Because even though the officials in our society talk endlessly about science, everything we value is of a higher order. it is symbolic. Symbolic means that you are representing something that is not visible in order to evoke it or transmit it or bring it into materialization. More on that later. In the drowsy and fallen state that people are, the things that they still know are only certain sharp sensations that manage to penetrate through their dreamy cloud. That's why when they talk about things, it's always in this sharp way. They want to be certain about an idea, because in reality, everything is living. It is rising and falling. It is part of the seasons. There is a tradition. One man teaches another, and then teaches a third, a generation after generation. There is no single idea that lives on its own. We cannot be sure. We can only be seasonal. We can flow with life. But in the drowsy state that human beings are in, that sharpness is all that's left, you see. And people do not doubt themselves. Modern people do not doubt themselves. They find it quite hard to understand what you're talking about if you talk about any of these matters. That's why Gurdjieff talked sometimes about the clarity of your intelligence being a fundamental part of a society. To maintain the clarity of your intelligence. Most of the things we see in the media are highly destructive for our intelligence, and such a society has really lost the plot and is roaming in an untethered way, blown about by the winds. In those old folk tales, there were sometimes the old woman or the ogre under the bridge, or the canary or the crocodile. That is really what you are. If you take the bullshit face away, what you actually are, your main tone, is one of those characters. The methods of religion refer to what is not visible. That's why they can be quite difficult to understand. They often actually use the second body. They trigger things happening in the second body. The neutralizing current is always very important and has incredible potential. Let's hear from Beelzebub again, and let's bear in mind what is often said about negative emotions. As soon as the three-brained beings of our megalocosmos, irrespective of exterior coating, acquire any degree of self-awareness, they begin to dream, consciously or instinctively, of going to that holy planet, so that later they may have the happiness of becoming a particle of that greatness with which sooner or later every essence is destined to blend. And for the realization of these dreams of theirs, those three-brained beings who have attained a greater self-awareness always eagerly and even joyfully accept those unpleasantnesses to their presence coming from privation suffered by their planetary bodies during their ordinary being existence, because they well understand and instinctively feel that their lower being body is, in their own sacred cosmic law of Trimezakamno, the indispensable source of denying manifestations of all kinds, and as such must always manifest itself negatively towards their affirming part. In other words, the manifestations of this lower part of theirs must necessarily always be opposed to what is required by their highest being part. Thus, every wish of the planetary body is taken as undesirable for the highest divine part that has to be coated and perfected, and that is why all the three-centered beings of our great megalocosmos constantly carry on a relentless struggle against the desires of their planetary body, so that through this dispute Crealnian friction, as it is called, The sacred crystallizations should be formed in them for the arising and affecting of this high divine being part. In this constant struggle of theirs, the equilibrating, harmonizing principle is their second being body, which in their own individual law of Trimusicamno represents the neutralizing source, and therefore this second being part always remains indifferent to their mechanical manifestations, but during their active manifestation it always tends, in accordance with the second order cosmic law of Urdjieff, to unite with those desires of which there are more, whether in one or the other of the two opposing being parts. There is some very important information here regarding neutralization. And now, Julius Evola will talk to us about the transcendent nature of primordial man. When we consider a transcendent nature, the absence of human fossils and the sole presence of animal fossils in remote prehistory may be interpreted to mean that primordial mankind was the last form of life to undergo the process of materialization, which process endowed the earlier animal-like human species with an organism capable of being. We may recall here that in some traditions there is the memory of a primordial race characterized by weak or soft bones. For instance, Li Tzu, when talking about the Hyperborean region in which the present cycle began, mentioned that the inhabitants of this region have soft bones. In more recent times, the fact that superior races that came from the north did not bury but cremated their dead is just another factor that needs to be considered when facing the dilemma caused by the absence of pieces of bones. Somebody may object, there is no trace whatsoever of this fantastic primordial mankind. But besides being somewhat naive to think that superior beings could not have existed without leaving behind traces such as ruins, utensils, weapons, and so on, it must be noted that in relatively recent eras there are residues of cyclopic works, though not all of them are typical of a civilized society. The Circle of Stonehenge, enormous stones put in a precarious and miraculous equilibrium, the Pedra Cansada in Peru, the Colossus of Tiahuanac, and the like. In any event, one must realize that these and similar indications will play a minimal role for those who are not determined to change their own frame of mind. Every epoch has its own myth through which it reflects a given collective climate. Today, the aristocratic idea that mankind has higher origins, namely a past of light and of spirit, has been replaced by the democratic idea of evolutionism, which derives the higher from the lower, man from the animal, civilization from the barbarian. This is not so much the objective result of a free and conscious scientific inquiry, but rather one of the many reflections that the advent of the modern world, characterized by inferior social and spiritual strata and by man without traditions, has necessarily produced on the intellectual and cultural plane. Yeah, a higher man processes much larger amounts of energy according to the structures that he's been able to form inside of him, and based on his knowledge and work and his being. He gives off a different light and lives in a different time. Many things are known by the wise. They foresee many things, the decline of the world and the end of the Aesir. Thank you for listening. Please take care.